So let's hop straight into it. Guillermo del Toro recently said that he would rather die than use AI. More specifically, he said, the value of art is not how much it costs and how little effort it requires, but how much you would risk to be in its presence. What would you say to him to convince him otherwise?
I'd say AI is just too generic of a term.
Yeah.
Right? We've been using machine learning in film and visual effects for decades now, right? So there's different kinds of AI. I always say there's a kind of design part of AI, and then there's a part of AI that's more meant for acceleration of work. That's kind of the AI that we're focused on. So he probably wouldn't listen to me, but yeah.
I think for us, I mean, we are a entertainment company, and we sort of like divide AI in two parts. One is more of in pure art form. Second is more around pure craft. And we feel that the art has to be there. Art has to be human-led, but all the craft part of it, that is something that can be accelerated through AI, right? So it's very essential to sort of like keep a clear distinction between what is art part and what is the craft part, right? So that's how we look at the AI. Yeah.
Probably say AI is not magic. So in order to create something incredible, you have to have creative intent. You have to have the craft. It's not as simple as you press a button or you do a prompt and you have something that's immediately can replace human storytelling. I look at it very similarly to like how we would use LLMs in work too. Like you can't just rely on AI to do everything. It has to have so much creativity, so much practice to really use the tools are evolving really quickly as well. So in itself, it's a utility, but it's also an ability to use it really well to tell and relay the intent that you have as a creative.
Yeah, and Nikola, you were a special effects editor before Wonder Dynamics, and now Wonder Dynamics makes software that turns video into 3D animation. So how did you go from working in the film industry to then wanting to become a tech entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think in visual effects, we are kind of the first layer in the film industry that gets affected by technological changes. So you have to always keep up with the changes. But me and my co-founder Ty, we were writing films at the time. We got early into this, about 2016. We're writing films, and every time we wrote something with sci-fi that would cost $100, $200 million, then we realized, okay, we can't afford this. Let's start looking at some of this technology. And we actually called it visual AI at the time. There were no term generative AI at the time, and we were trying to figure out how can we bring down the cost of the films we want to make. And started looking into kind of self-driving cars technology, robotics technology, which is all about analyzing the world around you. And the more visual effects is, really all about recognizing something on the screen that you want it to look natural, you want it not to be noticeable. So we started seeing like, how do I break apart a shot in as many layers as possible? And that's really started as, something selfishly that we wanted to do, just to make our own films. And then about 6 months into building, we realized, okay, this is much bigger than just us. There's a lot of people out there that are trying to make films. And I think it was my personal frustration as well. I come from a very small country, and it took me a long time to break in the industry as a VFX artist and then a supervisor. And I've seen so many talented directors and writers that are amazing artists, but maybe they're not great at selling or pitching or even coming to LA and ending up in industry. So that's where I see that this technology being a positive impact is enabling more people to tell stories.
Yeah, there's kind of a funny parallel where in both startups and in the film industry, people might not realize that a process of producing a film is that you have to raise the money. And
you're starting a startup in a way. It's quite actually similar. You have to find investors. You have to start an LLC. Every film has its own LLC. It's its own business in a way, right? And you have to find distribution. You have to find customers. Quite similar process actually. And I think people don't understand how much people in the film industry tend to kind of resist tech industry, which I think is really wrong because our industry exists because of technology that is invented. So for me, I think we're seeing more merge of the two now, but there's still quite ways to go.
Yeah, And Soyoung, I think also with 12 Labs, you are creating something that you can basically like control F video. And I was just saying backstage that in my first job out of college, one of my jobs was to manually tag photos and videos to archive them. So even as someone who is an artist myself, I'm like, if I had AI to do that, I would have saved so much time in this very rudimentary, rote job. So how do you think about that that accessibility aspect?
Yeah, so very different from Nikola. We started 12 Labs as a company. We started 5 years ago. We have 5 co-founders, but we come from a tech background and not a media background. But we, in our I think second year, we found ourselves working a lot in media. And the reason is because we build technology that can understand, contextualize what's happening in unstructured data, like multimodal video, image, etc. And if you think about where the most valuable, the most interesting stories lie, it's media, everything that we view on our phones, like UGC, movie, TV, even commercials, everything that, to convey stories and captured from raw footage to dailies all the way to something that's finished is a journey. And when we talk about accessibility, it's about how do you give all of these, so many different people and stakeholders, these different partners, companies that have to come together to create something amazing. How do you give them the same accessibility and almost be able to access the raw ingredients that they have in common language? And we're very surprised. Like there's so many efforts that have gone into creating of different metadata schemas, trying to create accessibility of like being able to use tags to find specific moments and scenes within video to be able to, create and stitch together the best stories. But in terms of how that applies to a creative process, is we really think of ourselves as a utility and a tool to give almost access to every moment of footage that a creative might have that they can use, and then that they can also share across all of their collaborators.
Yeah, and Prateek, how are you thinking about this within your company?
So just to take a back step, we started PocketFM back in 2018, and we wanted to reimagine a world of audio storytelling. So we started with India first. We saw like great traction. Surprisingly, we did our US experiment after 3 years, and US numbers, the core metrics that we track were pretty amazing as well. And the thing that we noticed was that stories don't have boundaries, right? I mean, if you are a great writer, if you can write great stories, it works across borders as well, right? So some of these stories that were written for Hindi language in India actually did work for US as well if we adapted it really well. So eventually the realization was that basically, can you reimagine the way entertainment platforms are being built, right? And if you think from a writer point of view, writer generally want to write content, they have great ideas. Can you support these writers by giving them tools and models which can create writing more accurate, faster, and cheaper? So that's the first part of entertainment stack that we are building. Can we give writers the co-pilot to write content? The second part is that we are building is the adaptation layer. So let's say if I'm an English writer, as I told you, the stories have no boundaries, right? So how can I help writers to distribute their content in, let's say, 10 different languages across the globe, in Europe, in Spain, in a bunch of different countries? So we're building the second layer, which is called the AI adaptation layer, where if you're any native English writer or Hindi writer or Spanish writer, we give models where you can convert your content into 80 different languages. So that's the second part of it. The third part is the production layer, right? Now, PocketFM is an audio platform. We also have comics platform and novels platform. So how do I, let's say, help writers distribute their content, which was written in a language, adapted in 80 different languages, to, let's say, in an audio format, in comics format. So we're giving them tools and models to convert and produce their content in different form factors, which they can in turn distribute either in PocketFM or in different companies. So that's how we are thinking about entertainment. We are sort of like reimagining entertainment stack through AI first enablement.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about how AI will impact creative jobs, there is a certain art to translation where you're not just putting something into Google Translate. Like, we've all probably put a sentence in there and we're like, that's not quite what I was saying. And so people that can speak multiple languages end up having like a very valuable role in making sure that the sanctity or the intention of the art doesn't get lost. So are you thinking about that in terms of AI translation, or like is there anything that you do to edit the product along the way?
Yeah, I mean, so the way I think we think about translation adaptation is that generally you can make a content work in any language if you adapt it really well, if you culturally adapt it really well, right? Now, and generally, like when you think about some of these adaptation product, they used to exist from past. We had like Google Translate, we have a bunch of these translators, but the translation as it is doesn't work. You can't scale a translated content, let's say, to a scale which an adapted content can scale, right? So we have adaptation product which you can use it for, again, as I told, to adapt in 80 different languages, and that's scaling pretty well.
Great. And so for all of you, you're in an interesting spot where all of you began working at your current companies or founded them while we were in like a pre-ChatGPT moment when people knew what AI was, but it wasn't this like hot button thing where anybody on the street probably has an opinion about like ChatGPT and education in schools. So how has the conversation that you're having with people in your lives around AI changed since then?
Much easier to explain to people, yeah, what you're doing. On one side, I think on the other side, we always had to educate people on the approach, as I mentioned. Are we generating from scratch, or are we kind of speeding up the process of visual effects, which is where we were focusing on the side. But it definitely helped. Sometimes when you're starting a company, if you have to over-educate people, it slows down the process of building that company. So I'd say that was a huge help on our side.
Yeah, I think for us, I mean, it's always been about, can AI multiply the creativity? And as I mentioned, some of these writers that we work with, some of these voiceover artists that we work with, initially couldn't produce the amount of content that they can now, right? And whenever you give them products and models which can increase the throughput, which can eventually increase the earning potential of these creative folks, creative writers and production artists, it sort of like always helps. So for us, I think it's always been about adding the incrementality in production instead of, let's say, replacing some of these artists, right? So that has been pretty helpful for us as well.
If you think about pre-ChatGPT, GPT has always existed, but it was, we were like starting, I think we were starting a company when GPT-3 was around. So it was a very exciting tool for developers, probably not yet good enough to power any real business use cases in production. So it did exist. But now bringing that with a new interface to anyone who can access it, it actually gives birth to so many different types of use cases that you can imagine. And so the product builders who build on top of GPT actually, the types of use cases and applications become so creative. As consumers have, as end users, they actually can have so many ideas of how they could use this technology, even though they may not be the ones to build it. So I think that's where we saw a lot of interesting things. Yes, it was easier to explain what we do, but also it's the fact that any end user that we would work with in any industry, namely also creative industries, of course, can now start to imagine, oh, what if there was an AI that could do this? And that's the beginning of a conversation that leads to how do we as a startup and a product company solve for problems in creative ways? Are there problems that this user has not been communicating because they never thought it could be solved? And it opens up all of these possibilities. Now what we see is, I think large language models are very incredible. AI can read and write very, very well. But we're very excited about the future where AI can actually see, hear, and watch the world. Because everything that we do is, it's multimodal. So that's kind of where we're excited to see, AI expand and, be part of that transition as we build out multimodal models.
And is there anything that you think that people are getting wrong when you talk about the role of AI in creativity?
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget. I think the fear is very justified, right? We have a lot of fear in the industry, especially entertainment industry. I think justification comes from we have a lot of specialized roles in our industry, especially in 3D and CGI. There's a lot of roles that are consequence of these tools we had, right? If you're a certain kind of artist, that in visual effects we always had these shifts in the industry that happen. I think a lot of people have this fear that we're going to be just spending a week to make a feature film and then release it, and then people want to pay, $10 to go see it. I think what we forget is that we always like art. I always say this: we like art because it's really hard. I admire directors, like Steven Spielberg and Cameron and others because I can't do what they do. It's extremely difficult to do what they do, right? The process of filmmaking is really, really complex. We're simplifying it now, but that doesn't mean just because it's going to be really simple to put pixels on a screen that we're going to stop there. We just don't know what that new ceiling is. We're just moving the floor up. And I think the fear comes from that sense of that now art is going to become cheap and we're going to stop even if it takes 2 days to make something. I think people will recognize what's lazy. Like, for instance, today, if you go see a film in the theaters and you get really frustrated how bad of writing is. It's lazy writing, Because, I tend to get really frustrated, right? I think we're going to see the same with, understanding, as we're seeing now with AI slop. We can understand what AI slop is and you get a bit frustrated. It's good for memes, but you don't want to use it for storytelling and long form. So I think that's where the fear comes from, but I'm confident we just don't understand yet what that next level is. It's like trying to explain to someone 7 years ago how Avatar is made in the future, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to explain that. It's the same now, we just don't know what that next level is.
Yeah, and I'm curious, since you were in the visual effects world and working directly on films before Wonder Dynamics, what did these conversations look like around when Avatar came out, or as CGI got better, and as you've said, there's been technology in filmmaking for so long,
Yeah.
and there has to be the same worries.
Yeah, 100%. I think what happened, coming from an indie space, you always stayed away from VFX shots because you couldn't afford it. You stay away from green screen, you stay away from roto because it's expensive. We're seeing the shift now, right? We're seeing the shift. Only studios were able to afford a lot of CGI. And back in the early days, I would say, it was quite similar, right? There was this big excitement, but also fear that we're going to be using too much of it, which essentially did happen. And there's a rule, especially in the early days, it's better to have 5 good VFX shots than 100 average VFX shots, because that's where you can recognize something's not looking and takes you out of the story. So I think it is similar to early days of it. People the market was really growing really fast, and then that created new roles. So I do see very similar things. The only difference I'm seeing is I think there's always been this gatekeeping by big studios of distribution, right? We've seen this big distribution change that happened, and that really shook up the industry. We used to have pre-sale, used to have DVDs, now you don't have that with the streaming platform. So the financial model is in the middle of a change, and this technological change is coming around the same time, which to me is actually a little bit of a necessary shift in industry, because the model wasn't working. We went from a box office model to a streaming model, and the economics behind it just did not work. So I do see this change as something necessary, but I think also it's an expansion of the market. Right? You have a very, very focused global market on one location, and I think we went from distribution changing and kind of opening with YouTubes of the world where everybody can distribute what they want, but then production was really gate-kept because it costs 100 million. Not everybody can afford 200 million or 100 million for a movie. I think that production thing will change now, so we'll see what that means. I think it's going to come down to marketing after that, because you're going to have a lot of noise, and who's going to be able to come through the noise, through the content.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking of the noise, you mentioned AI slop, which is something that is on all of our minds, especially with the Sora app now. It's everywhere. How are you thinking about just the sheer amount of mediocre AI-generated art in the world?
That's me?
All of you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the memes are funny. I like the memes.
There's some good ones.
Yeah, there's some good memes out there. I think, once you give these tools to hands of creators, they'll figure out what they want to do with it, right? I do think the filmmaking process and the long-form storytelling is still extremely difficult because you got to understand the story structure. You got to understand. I'm not a believer. I really hope we don't go in a future where we're just going to see synthetic actors. I really don't believe we go in that future. We're more focused on how do I break down a shot and have it in 3D and control every single aspect to it. Because it's one problem to generate about 80% where you want to be, but the last 20%, the 80-20 rule, the last 20% of kind of navigating the small changes. Directors are very, very specific in a sense, like I want this camera to move an inch here, I want the light to hit from this angle, etc. That's really where controllability will be, and we're seeing more and more research come on that aspect. But I do think it does not solve, some of the hard storytelling issues that we're having and challenges that we're having around with it. So we're still in really early phases, I think, and I hope we don't end up in a sense where we're just watching synthetic actors and or the actors are just licensing their likeness and sitting at home. I hope we don't end up with that future. I don't think we will, but you never can predict these kind of things.
Yeah.
I think, I agree with Nikola on this. I mean, we'll see a lot of influx of short form content coming in from which could be like completely synthetic, but when you talk about long form content where you require more skill, you require more craft, I think you would still see more authentic content because synthetically it's hard. I think we are a long form audio production company. For us as well, I mean, it's pretty hard to replicate creativity, let's say for 10 hours of content, 20 hours of content, as opposed to, let's say, 15 minutes of content, right? So when you think about long form storytelling, long form story generation, be it audio, be it video, I still feel that I think it's going to be completely authentic, and it's pretty hard. I mean, as Nikola mentioned, I mean, it's hard maintaining the quality for long form, for long hours. I mean, it's pretty hard.
I was also curious your thoughts on this specifically because I think something that makes Pocket FM different from the other companies represented here is that you do have features that could maybe be used for writers to think about, is there a different ending I could use for this chapter of a story? So how do you feel like, how are writers reacting to that kind of
I mean, so generally, interactive stories is a big vertical. We have seen some of the other companies have experimented with that. And when you talk about long form storytelling, it opens up a lot of channels for implementing these interactive stories, right? Because you have like tons of characters. The characters' progression could be very different for different kind of users. And sort of like we are giving this option to writers where they can play around. It's still in testing phases because generally when you think about too much of flexibility in terms of let's say where these writers want to keep these characters, I mean, it could go wrong as well. So we're giving like few options to writers where they can tweak certain personalities of the character as per, let's say, what users want, right? We're still seeing good traction there, but it's still a long way to go to make it more efficient.
And we're getting toward the end of the panel, but I do want to make sure that we touch on the literal technology that we're talking about here, where there's a lot of discourse around LLMs, and is it possible to build an LLM responsibly? Is it possible to use something trained on artists' work without their consent in a way that is ethical, or how do you even know like whether artists are consenting to this? And so how are you all thinking about that in your companies?
I think for us, I mean, we have a UGC platform which has 100,000 writers, and we have thousands of voice artists as well. I think we use these models very responsibly. Every bit of data that we use for fine tuning or training has author's consent, and generally a part of, let's say, outcome also goes to, let's say, these authors and writers as part of revenue share as well, right? So personally, in Pocket Entertainment, we use it very responsibly. Everything has its own consent from writers and voice artists before we fine tune or use any data for training purposes.
So I'll caveat by saying for 12 Labs, we, from our experience of building foundation models, we build understanding models. So they're not generating net new things. It's really looking at content, looking at footage, and analyzing what's happening inside, enabling search. But when it comes to actually how are models trained in more a general sense, especially generative models, I think there's two things. There's direction we have to go in, and secondly is what's actually today, what happens in practice. I think first where we should go obviously is we need to make sure that the data that is used to train models are there's attribution to where the data is where the content is coming from, or where the creative license lies. And I think we're seeing more and more companies that are being born and they're training models from scratch that are using ethically sourced or licensed data to be able to do that. And this is also very important, not just because it also could potentially undermine, it has risks if around IP, if there's something that links back to a creative asset that wasn't licensed, right? The second part in practice, I think, that's interesting is there is a trade-off, and that's what we're seeing today, I think, which is when you're actually the one who's using these models to create something, you want to use the model that gives you the best output for what you're trying to do. That may or may not be the model, the AI model that has all of its training data exposed, or something that for sure that everything has been licensed. And so you do, as a user, or maybe as a company that's that's buying these models for your internal users, face a trade-off of what's the path you take, and there's no guidance on decision there, but it's not as simple as a yes or no. It is something you have to decide between what's the best one for the job, combined with what is the risk associated with it, and how do we mitigate that.
Just that so both me and my co-founder Ty, we were artists before, and it was very important for us, from the get-go. As Soyoung said, it is a bit harder, right? You can go in and scrape online whatever you can find. That's an easy way out. For us, it was because of the way our product works. We have about 25 models that are working together, and we're observing nature. We're observing a shot. We're taking a camera track. We're taking pose estimation, 2D and 3D, estimating lighting and noise, trying to understand what's going on in the shot so I can extract it in a 3D space, right? So for us, for that to work, there was really, especially early on, there was not a lot of data on the market that we could get, because the video alone is not going to get you much without a ground truth. You always needed ground truth in 3D space to have really quality results, to know in millimeter the distance from an actor from the camera, or the building from the camera, or the movement of the camera. So we had to build early on really a kind of synthetic data set generator, or a world model for us to randomize the positions or the performances, the position of the camera, the lighting, the environment, the locations, etc. That was a necessity for us early on, because especially on the pose estimation part, there were a lot of motion capture data that was meant for games, and it's usually cameras up, angles shooting down, and it gets a full body. And these models will break apart if you're moving the camera to a close-up, let's say from a wide shot to a close-up, and you're spinning the camera around. So we really had to use the synthetic data set generator to recreate a lot of film shots or a lot of conditions that you see on a film set. So, but I agree, it's especially in early day in a startup, you're going to get a lot of kind of pressures from investors, et cetera, to move fast. And sometimes these decisions will make you move a little bit slower. But we saw, especially working with big studios, that was a big differentiator. There's a lot of these tools that the studios cannot touch, or the creatives cannot touch because of the IP infringement concerns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that is all the time we have, but something that I thought was fun about this panel was I moderated a very similar panel last year, and I'm sure next year we'll have another panel touching on the relationship between AI and creativity. So look forward to talking about that again.
Mm-hmm. So thanks for having us.
Thank you.